Good morning and welcome to Rising. We have a show for you today that you will hopefully enjoy. Good morning, Niall.
Morning, Robby. How are you today?
I'm missing my laptop because it has a virus that apparently all the laptops in the Hills offices are getting, which is kind of ridiculous and reminds me of the 1990s.
I am virus resistant so far, but at any moment I could be taken
You updated your Norton.
I did not do any such thing. I just miraculously avoided it so far. But despite your lack of laptop, you do have a radar for us, so let's have it. What's on your radar, Robby?
Indeed I do. Thomas Massie being sassy, calling out the administration's approach to Iran, slamming the bombing campaign against Iran's nuclear capabilities as the new 2 weeks to slow the spread of 2025. Talk about viruses. It's a good line. Watch this.
My question is, does, 3 bombings and we're done with Iran's nuclear ambitions? Is that the 2 weeks to slow the spread of 2025? Is this, we were told 2 weeks to slow the spread then, now we're told it's just going to take 3 bombings. But what happens when Israel gets bombed again? Is Trump going to sit by and say, no, we're not going to further engage in this war?
No surprise, I like that metaphor quite a bit. At the start of the pandemic, if you recall that, we were assured by the experts in government and healthcare we just needed to lock down and social distance for 2 weeks in order to give hospitals the time they need to prepare for handling COVID cases. A brief, minimal interruption, and then life would return to normal. But that was a lie. Government policymakers then extended the 2 weeks all summer. We were no longer trying to just slow the spread. We were trying to minimize cases until the vaccines were available. Well, and then until everyone had a vaccine, and then until some theoretical time in the future where there would be no more cases. Fortunately, the public had lost patience by then, and our government's preference for restrictions on our liberties was overruled. Guess what? Thomas Massie thinks it's happening again. Our government has assured us that this is just a limited number of strikes, not against the Iranian government itself, but against its nuclear capabilities. Vice President J.D. Vance confidently asserted that the U.S. is at war with Iran's nukes, not Iran. Well, that's a distinction that frankly doesn't make very much sense, but perhaps he feels he has to make it since Congress never voted to authorize a war against Iran. Another point Thomas Massie keeps making. Indeed, the Iraq War, by contrast, was debated, discussed, ultimately voted on, so that those who backed it could later be held accountable. That is what Massie thinks should happen this time, too. And for his sin, wanting Congress to do its job per the Constitution, President Trump is savaging him. Indeed, Trump has laid into Massie with such fury. Massie joked Trump should try to get a declaration of war for that as well. And look, it's not just idle chatter. Trump is also launching a primary challenge against Massie. Axios reported on Monday that Trump's team is starting a super PAC with the goal of getting Massie out of office. Trump political advisor Chris LaCivita said they would spend whatever it takes to defeat Massie. Well, that'll be quite a challenge for them, as Massie is extremely popular in his district and has previously shrugged off attempts by AIPAC and others to harm him. Now, Massie, I would argue, is popular because he is MAGA. He is America first. He has principles and doesn't just throw them away because Trump is suddenly singing the neocon song. Massie knows that America's regime change wars in the Middle East have been a disaster and that Americans are sick of them. We do not want to get bogged down in a conflict between Israel and Iran. And we know that our government often shifts the goalposts on us. 2 weeks to slow the spread becomes multi-year lockdowns, mask requirements, school closures, and eventual vaccine mandates. Similarly, a bombing campaign against nuclear capabilities could become that dirty two-word phrase we don't like to hear so much, regime change. And now the news, of course, this morning, Niall, is that we might have a ceasefire, tenuous deal in place. We will discuss that in greater detail in our next segment. But for now, I'm no surprise to you. I'm a fan of Thomas Massie.
Sure.
And I think it's funny that Trump is kind of raging against him and also Rand Paul a little bit. But Massie has faced challenges before from a more neoconservative hawkish from Israel, from AIPAC. And he shrugged those off, so I don't know if it'll be different this time.
No, I mean, I think for a start, his point or his argument that he makes and you endorses about the kind of slippery slope seems a very fair argument. Once you get involved in military action, then do you open the door for more military action for what Colin Powell used to call mission creep? So I think those things are problems, or potential problems. Yes, we do have a ceasefire. We'll get into that, as you say, in a moment, but whether it will hold is certainly open to question. Then the fact of Trump trying to sort of intimidate Massie seems to me to be beyond Thomas Massie and sort of an attempt to impose an even greater level of loyalty to Trump across the board within the Republican Party. It's not as if there's any shortage of that loyalty in the first place. They, generally speaking, do his bidding. But to me, this is about sort of making an example of Massie, which Trump hopes will work to quell any dissent. But as you say, Massie may not, in fact, be very easily defeated in a primary.
Because I think, broadly speaking, there's two kinds of internal resistance to Trump within the Republican Party. There's like a personality-based resistance that now has been stamped out entirely, but was part of characteristic of the first Trump administration, where you still had, kind of never Trump people who saw themselves as Republicans and were remaining in the party and were criticizing Trump for his behavior. I mean, some of his policies as well, but it was more about who he is as a person. That's kind of over with. That if that's how you feel about Trump, you're really just not in the Republican Party anymore. Right. So now the only kind of resistance or disagreement that remains is a policy-based disagreement that never focuses on Trump himself, but is about, well, Trump should do this policy rather than this policy, which ironically has, in my view, allowed for more interesting policy disagreements and fights in the second Trump administration than there was in the first Trump administration, because the conflicts over him personally so overshadowed everything else. Now we're actually seeing people who want, a more immigration restrictionist policy versus a more, well, we got to make accommodations for high-skilled immigrations. Tariffs was another one, and now aspects of foreign policy. And I do think now we're getting to a place where I think the regime change conversation has been curtailed somewhat. That doesn't seem to be as much on the table. Again, we'll get into more of that in a moment, but it seems like the argument, and also Thomas Massie is just making a constitutional argument that we should be taking votes on this. I don't see how anyone could reach a conclusion other than that this has to be voted on, particularly because holding people accountable for how they voted on the Iraq and Afghanistan wars has been an important part of our politics for the last 20 years. It is what allowed for, it certainly allowed for Barack Obama's victory over Hillary Clinton. You can make a case it allowed for Trump's victory over Hillary Clinton. So to not be taking those votes just seems like a fundamental dereliction of duty to me.
Yeah, look, on the point of the vote, I think it would obviously be better if people were on the record for or against it. It is also just, I think, almost unarguably true that Trump should have sought such authorization, because when you look at the War Powers Act, it pretty clearly lays out scenarios like this. There are exceptions, none of which the current situation in Iran fulfills or meets. But to your point about debates within the Republican Party, it is interesting that there's this push and pull between the genuine policy differences that you have just outlined and Trump's willingness or desire to stamp his own will on the party once he has decided that he's going in a certain direction. And so I don't think it is healthy for the Republican Party, nor would it be healthy for any party, to have the leader of that party say, well, if you disagree with me, I'm going to fund a primary against you. Yeah,
the system is kind of, you're allowed to disagree until the decision is made, and then you're supposed to fall in line behind the president, which could be improved.
Not the wisest when it comes to war, certainly. Yes. In any event, in rare form, Trump has been lashing out at Israel and Iran, this time dropping an F-bomb. That's next. President Trump is saying that his warning to Israel has worked out in his favor.
The president wrote on Truth Social, Israel is not going to attack Iran. All planes will turn around and head home, while doing a friendly plane wave to Iran. Nobody will be hurt. The ceasefire is in effect. Trump had wrote on Truth Social this morning, Israel, do not drop those bombs. If you do, it is a major violation. Bring your pilots home now. Donald J. Trump, President of the United States.
This entire episode stemmed from Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz saying that Iran had violated the agreement. Katz said he had ordered a strike on Tehran in response, despite Iran's armed forces general staff having denied any such violation.
Trump then lashed out at the two countries, even going so far as to drop an expletive. Let's watch.
I didn't like plenty of things I saw yesterday. I didn't like the fact that Israel unloaded right after we made the deal. They didn't have to unload. And I didn't like the fact that the retaliation was very strong. But in all fairness, Israel unloaded a lot. And now I hear Israel just went out because they felt it was violated by one rocket that didn't land anywhere. That's not what we want, I'll tell you. And I'm telling you, I'm not happy about that, Israel, either. You know what? We basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the they're doing. Do you understand that?
Per Reuters, the last round of strikes before the ceasefire killed 4 people in southern Israel, and Iranian officials said that 9 people were killed in northern Iran. Reuters also reports that sources say Qatar secured Tehran's agreement to the ceasefire and that 3 Trump officials were in contact with the Iranians.
Iran had fired missiles into the US's largest Middle East military base, which is indeed in Qatar. Nobody was hurt, and Trump thanked Tehran for warning about those strikes beforehand.
Israel says that Iran had launched 3 missiles after the ceasefire went into effect, but that they caused no casualties nor did any damage. The Israeli Air Force then destroyed a radar array in Tehran. The Israeli Prime Minister's office says that Israel was refraining from further strikes after Prime Minister Netanyahu's call with Trump. So hopefully we get a ceasefire, an end to hostilities that actually sticks here. Trump, in colorful language, is getting at the heart of the difficulty, which is that we're talking about countries, governments that have been in conflict for a very, very long period of time, that often want to attack each other. And then I guess my question to Trump, if I was out there this morning chatting with him in front of the helicopter, would be, well, then why are we involved? If as you seem to recognize, and I agree, they just want to fight each other, can we get out of their way? I mean, it's not. I mean, we can try to structure diplomacy, but we shouldn't be fighting one side's wars for them. We're just going to get drawn into an endless conflict as well, which it kind of sounds like Trump is once again realizing maybe his detour from the I don't want to get involved in more Middle East wars, peace, no new wars. He took a little neocon detour last couple of weeks. Maybe he's back on track now.
Look, I mean, the intractability of the conflict is obviously a huge problem. There are legitimate reasons, I would argue, for that intractability. It's not just that the peoples are somehow sort of ethnically warlike.
Yeah.
There are reasons for that. But it is, I mean, it's a conflict that has gone on. I mean, you can draw the starting line almost anywhere for that conflict, and it still continues. The one thing I would say in relation to this, and I am so often very critical of Trump, but a public rebuke by an American president of the Israelis, you literally do love to see it, and it is very rare for it to happen.
Sure.
And I think that he was quite right in saying what he said, and it is one of those interesting ones where you can never tell exactly where he is going to come down on certain issues. He seems to feel rightly that he is sort of personally invested in the success of this ceasefire because there have been some of the criticisms that we have already discussed. I think he wants it to be this situation where there was a brief US involvement in the conflict directly in terms of US warplanes. That's now over with. There's now going to be a ceasefire. He can claim success. He does not want that endangered by either side, and I think that's why he is more inclined to criticize Israel.
His statement about thanking Iran for letting us know where the missiles were coming from was great. It was just so Trumpy, and speaks to Iran, I guess, not wanting to escalate this conflict, which is a good thing. That also then does make me, I think it's inevitable that you consider, if Iran's government is savvy enough or interested in its own survival enough to not want greater conflict with the U.S. such that they warn us what they're going to hit so that no one gets hurt, so that it's just for show. If they can think all that through, how can we possibly square that with the idea that it's a genocidal Islamic extremist regime that will nuke Israel and trigger World War III, and including have itself completely obliterated the second they have a nuclear weapon? Sure. I don't think it's possible to square those two facts.
No, and this came out in that viral conversation between Tucker Carlson and Ted Cruz, where Tucker, to be fair, was bringing out this weird contradiction where the people who wanted essentially war with Iran simultaneously argue this is the most terrifying regime ever, the biggest warmonger and terrorist government anywhere in the world is going to kill us all, but it's also so weak that we can just bomb them without suffering any repercussions. So I think that was obviously a kind of nonsensical position.
And similarly, when he was saying, and they're trying to kill Trump, but they've failed, but because they're not very good at it. But they want to kill him, but they can't do it.
Right. So we have to go after them for something that they can't. We don't think they have the capability of doing. And just briefly, Robby, before we run out of time on this section, one of the difficulties I think in talking about Trump's conduct of this crisis, like so many other things, is that he just seems to change so rapidly. I mean, just looking at the last 48 hours on the Sunday shows with people like Vance and Rubio coming out and saying we're not interested in regime change. By Sunday night, Trump was saying, well, maybe we are actually. Then the next day, there's a ceasefire, and then there's these angry comments from him to reporters as he walks to the helicopter. It's very difficult to get a real fix on exactly where he is, and I think that does complicate matters.
I hear that. I think a Trump defender would say that's part of his negotiating strategy, and he didn't intend to actually have regime change. He writes something like that on Truth Social to spook them into wanting to make some kind of deal. I think that's what they say. So what looks like incoherence or careening from one thought to the next is part of some negotiating tactic to make them think, I'm really crazy, I could do this, but I don't want to. I want to get along, which I hope that is the case, and I hope we get some kind of lasting peace here.
I hope it is. I tend to think it is. Just in fact, incoherence and chaos. We shall see.
Andrew Cuomo next up, trying to make a big comeback in New York City today. But will he be blocked by the younger progressive Zohran Mamdani? We'll get into that next. Clock is winding down in the contentious mayoral primary battle for the Big Apple. Former Governor Andrew Cuomo spent weeks at the top of the pack of the Democrats, but progressive candidate Zohran Mamdani might just pull off what would be a stunning defeat of Cuomo. Mamdani is winning the final round of ranked choice voting with 52% to Cuomo's 48%. This is according to the final poll ahead of today's primary.
Ranked choice voting is an election method in which voters rank their candidates in order of preference. So that allows second, third, and fourth preference votes to matter as the lowest polling candidates are eliminated. If a candidate wins more than 50%, then they win. If not, the process repeats until that happens for someone. In this survey, Cuomo topped Mamdani on round one with 36% versus 34%. But the model showed that after 8 rounds, then Mamdani surpassed Cuomo and got over the line by a narrow 51.8 to 48.2%. New York City Comptroller Brad Lander remains in third, and he made it to the 7th round with 20.1%. Out of 11 candidates, whoever wins Tuesday will face off against incumbent Mayor Adams in November, who's running as an independent, I believe. Cuomo has stated that even if he loses, he'll run against Adams in November, Cuomo himself running as an independent.
Mamdani and Lander joined forces by cross-endorsing each other, urging their supporters to rank the other candidate second. Social media has lit up. UAW endorsed Mamdani on Monday. The union posted in X, quoted, saying, UAW President Fain and our New York City members are proud to support Zohran K. Mamdani. He's not owned by Wall Street. He's fighting for $30 an hour, free transit, housing for all, and real democracy on the job and in our communities. Rank Zohran number 1 for New York City mayor on election day. Former Nevada congressional candidate Tom Lane posted, quote, DSA-backed socialist Zohran Mamdani is now leading Andrew Cuomo in the New York City mayoral ranked choice primary. Let that sink in. A guy who wants to defund the NYPD is beating a former governor. This is what happens when the far left hijacks a city. And that is Tony Lane, not Tom Lane, excuse me.
No problem. Can I just get in briefly on that point, hijacks a city? The only way the far left will hijack a city is if the people of that city vote for the far left candidate. This is this propensity of Republicans or people on the right to also talk about Democrat-run cities. Cities are run by Democrats if the residents of those cities vote for Democrats. So let's, that sort of language I think is unnecessarily intended to scare.
Going to win if he wins the election, he wins the election, and New York City can get the socialist policies it wants and I think deserves. I don't care. I don't live there. It's no skin off my back. And I also dislike Andrew Cuomo so much and find him completely unacceptable as a choice to lead New York City after the horrific things he did as governor of the state, presiding over not just a disastrous nursing home COVID policy that resulted in needless death, but then covering it up to satisfy his own ego, to sell more books, ordering staff members allegedly to disguise the number of to conceal
the death toll,
and then in addition to what he actually resigned over, which was numerous sexual misconduct accusations. To my mind, that was far less serious. Not saying it's not serious, but less serious in character than the real bad other stuff. But fine, whatever. You don't have to rank them. For a variety of reasons, I find him unfit to return to office. So I don't know what I would do in this. Well, I know what I would do. I would just rank someone else because there's a million people running, and you get to vote for up to 5. How nice.
Yeah.
I think. Look, I think Mamdani, as far as the far left goes, is a perfectly good, appealing rep. He seems like a nice man. I like his advertising. I don't have anything against him on a personal level. I actually do find it interesting that on some of his policies, it's not that he's run away from the left, but he has certainly not used the off-putting rhetoric of the left on police and criminal justice issues. He specifically said, no, we will not defund the police. We are going to have robust public safety. That's very important. I think it's telling that he knows that that's a real loser in terms of the left's package of ideas. I don't love a lot of his other plans. In particular, he seems against the kind of the New York school system where you have you have separate schools for more advanced learners, separate programs like that. He is an enemy of that system or has spoken out against it. I think changing the system away from that would be very, very bad. I think promoting better abled students into environments and classrooms where they are with their peers and can succeed is a fine and good thing for a public school system to do. So again, I am not a huge fan of his policies, but if he wins, you know what? That's what the mainstream middle liberal Democrats deserve for going with a man who presided over such a disaster, is what I would say.
Yeah, look, there are appealing parts of Mamdani's platform as well. You know, the free buses idea has really captured the public imagination, and I think that'd be a very good idea. There's also this idea of having a government-run grocery store in each borough, which I like and you will no doubt loathe. No. And I think that it is a good idea to try to keep prices down and to keep food affordable for New Yorkers, the minimum wage, which was mentioned in the UAW, all of those things, UAW endorsement, all of those things have got, I think, some support. Andrew Cuomo is, to my mind, a very, very flawed candidate. The sexual misconduct stuff, yes, it never resulted in criminal charges, but I think the number of, I would say, credible or plausible allegations against him, I think, is troubling. And I do share your views of his conduct in relation to COVID and the nursing homes because it looked to me like he was just flat out lying in many of the instances. So if he loses, I will not be shedding any tears at all. If Mamdani wins on his, free buses and free Palestine kind of platform, I will not object to that. The cynic in me, or not even cynic, but the world-weary side of me thinks that the machine politician often wins. I know we read out the results of that poll with Mamdani edging it. I still think Cuomo might ultimately prevail in the end.
Well, and even if Mamdani wins the nomination, Cuomo might enter the general election as an independent. Eric Adams will then still be. That would become a very interesting three-way race at that point. Eric Adams also someone with a lot of flaws, a lot of
baggage,
accusations of corruption as well.
Absolutely. Up next, is Tulsi Gabbard still a key player within Trump world? Comedian Tim Dillon questions her position as Israel-Iran tensions continue to roil the region.
Is Tulsi Gabbard getting sidelined within the Trump administration?
With Israel-Iran tensions all the rage, comedian Tim Dillon accused the Director of National Intelligence of playing hollow theatrics after she posted this video on social media. Let's watch.
As we stand here today, closer to the brink of nuclear annihilation than ever before, political elite and warmongers are carelessly fomenting fear and tensions between nuclear powers. perhaps it's because they are confident that they will have access to nuclear shelters for themselves and for their families.
And here is Tim Dillon blasting Gabbard over her ominous warnings.
You're in the thing now. You got to start calling people out, naming names. Stop this. Let's stop playing footsie with the here. Who's trying to get us into the thing? Name. Everyone up there is tongue-tied. You got Cash Patel on Rogan going like, humming.
Dillon goes on and on.
You're in it now. You're in it. If people are trying to start a nuclear war, arrest them. Tell us who they are. I know it's more complicated than this, but here's the deal. You can't have the benefit of the doubt anymore if you're in the thing. I know. You go, that's a permanent government. They operate in the shadows. I know. But I cannot hear these ominous warnings.
Gabbard, in her March testimony, said that Iran had a stock of materials but was, quote, not building nuclear weapons, and Supreme Leader Khamenei has not authorized the nuclear weapons program that he suspended in 2003. After getting bashed by President Trump, who called Gabbard wrong about Iran building a nuclear weapon, she kind of changed her tune. Late last week, she wrote on X, in parts, the dishonest media is intentionally taking my testimony out of context and spreading fake news as a way to manufacture division. America has intelligence that Iran is at the point that it could produce a nuclear weapon within weeks to months if they decided to finalize the assembly. To echo something that Tim Dillon said there, I do think this is true of maybe not just MAGA people, but frankly, all political figures, that being in playing defense is, or I guess offense, being out of power, being the faction not in control of the government is easier, especially for Republicans, because then they can just whine about everything. Maybe it's not. I think it's more true for Republicans than Democrats. I think Democrats, they like government more, so they like being in charge of government and pulling the levers of government in order to wield government power because it's more comfortable to them in their ideology, where Republicans at least profess to hate the government and want to destroy it and love railing against it and just love whining on Fox and on social media that they can't get their way and they're being thwarted by the mean old deep state is starving us and it's so unfair. And now, when they're in power, exactly like Tim Dillon says, they don't have that excuse anymore.
Well, yes, as far as that argument goes. I take the point that opposition is in lots of ways easier because you just say the evil opposition, the evil party in government.
By the way, I affirm that it is easier. Man, when Joe Biden was in power, my job as a right-of-center critic of Democrats who has idiosyncratic libertarian views and doesn't agree with everything Trump does either. My job was much easier when it was just Joe Biden. I'd be like, yeah, I'm against all of this.
It's terrible. Yeah, no, I get that point. And I mean, I get that it is a more difficult position if the party with which one is sympathetic but maybe differs in some ways, as you do from Trump, is in power. Now, the thing that interested me about the Tim Dillon stuff, he's a person that I think you're probably much more familiar with than I am. I am not so knowledgeable about those kind of online guys. But it did strike me that what he said there about Tulsi, to me, is a very good representation of how a completely worthy skepticism of power and what can be done with power can sort of tumble into very excessive language and sometimes even slightly authoritarian thinking. Like to suggest that Tulsi Gabbard should arrest people who are plotting a nuclear war is hyperbolic, to say the least. Now, you can say, then people like Dillon take refuge in the idea then, well, he's only a comedian with a podcast. But he's still saying it, and he wants the underlying argument to be taken seriously. There was another point which we didn't play in those excerpts, where he talked about if you're going to get whacked for saying the truth, you better say the truth and get whacked. Nobody's getting whacked here. Tulsi Gabbard has a more skeptical position of interventionism, which is an argument that she is entitled to make. She's entitled to release her video, even though it was an odd video, and I had some questions about exactly what point she was trying to make, but she's entitled to do that. And no one's getting whacked from either side, except perhaps the unfortunate victims of foreign wars, but that's not the point that Tim Dillon is making. So I just find that sort of stuff rather overwrought.
Fair enough. I don't think he meant, well, I don't know what he meant. We should not arrest people for plotting. Well, we should, I guess, expose is the better word, or thwart in some ways, I guess.
I mean, if someone was trying to seize the red button, then of course you should arrest them. But he is talking, I think, about people who are making the argument for war against Iran, or maybe ramping up the war against Russia and Ukraine or something like that. But like, to arrest people for policy differences seems to me not the road we should be going down.
Well, yes, that is bad. Although I think Tim Dillon and Joe Rogan type critics of the establishment in the system would say that those people, maybe not on this subject specifically, but have gone after dissenters and critics on COVID and other subjects, maybe not, literally with grabbing them on the streets and throwing them into prison, but by making it harder for them to express their views on social media and that kind of thing, which maybe you can say is not as serious.
Not arresting them.
Well, I mean, to be fair, there have been some people. There was that one guy who was prosecuted for a joke about the elections, for posting a joke about remember to vote on a different day, like Democrats remember to vote, who got prosecuted for a election-related crime. It's a speech issue. He's defended by the ACLU. It was a whole. Are they telling me his name? Is that what you're doing? Douglas Mackey. That was his name. It's a pretty appalling case, honestly. Liberal, principled free speech people have come to his defense. So there are occasions of that happening.
I will leave it at that, and we shall get back to it later.
Joe Rogan criticizing ICE deportations on his podcast. Is Trump's signature policy losing popularity? We will discuss next.
Discomfort may be brewing, even on the right, over the realities of Trump's immigration crackdown. Take a look at this video out of Santa Ana that has gone viral in recent days, apparently showing several Border Patrol agents wearing face coverings and tactical vests, holding a man down, while one agent repeatedly strikes him on his right arm and near his head, before placing him in the back of an unmarked car. That man was later identified by his family as Narciso Barranco, a father to 3 sons, all of whom are Marines. His family says Barranco was picked up by alleged federal immigration officers while he was working as a landscaper at an IHOP, and they have alleged that the stop was due in part to racial profiling.
In response, DHS posted another video of the incident to X, showing Barranco running away from agents with a weed whacker in hand, and wrote this: "He assaulted federal law enforcement with the weed whacker. Perhaps the mainstream media would like our officers to stand there and be mowed down instead of defending themselves. What a completely slanted portrayal of what actually happened." But even Joe Rogan had some criticisms for the Trump administration this week, appearing surprised at the broad, indiscriminate use of the Trump administration's immigrant dragnet, calling both ICE's conduct and the subsequent protests in Los Angeles, quote, effing nuts, and following it up with this.
I don't think if the Trump administration, if they're running and they said, we're going to go to Home Depot and we're going to arrest all the people at Home Depot, we're going to go to construction sites and we're going to just tackle people at constructions. I don't think anybody would have signed up for that. They said, we're going to get rid of the criminals and the gang members first, right? And now we're seeing Home Depots get raided. That's crazy.
Firstly, we'll get on to Rogan, of course, in a second. The case of Mr. Barranco, I mean, that video, I think, is deeply disturbing and appears to show him being beaten. Now we'll see if the other, there it is, there again. That seems to me just ridiculously excessive force on its face. I noted the DHS statement that you read out, Robby. I mean, even if, and I don't know if he's even been charged with assault, which DHS is claiming, even if he has, he's clearly in a prone position on the ground and being struck there, which I think is inherently concerning and disturbing.
I will add that I'm increasingly a little worried. If you're watching some of these, masked officers, on some of them it does say police on the back of their tactical gear. Although I guess if you're seeing them front on, you wouldn't necessarily see the police. But it doesn't say that on all of it. One reason to not generally have the police masked is that you could impersonate the police and kidnap
yeah.
someone or steal their car over
Right,
this. We were just
Well-
we were talking to a colleague of ours here at the Hill who had their car stolen not in District of Columbia. That can lend itself toward bad actors taking advantage of people.
Well, sorry to cut across you, but I mean, in the terrible killings in Minnesota just recently, that guy allegedly was, I think, dressed in some fashion as a law enforcement
Absolutely.
officer. So,
yeah.
you know,
Well, and in that case, he was impersonating. Yeah, he was actually impersonating a law enforcement. I'm saying if it's unclear.
Yeah.
And people will react. You know, if you think you're being attacked by just some masked assailant.
Right.
Some of these people are harder. This is hard to tell apart from
know.
Antifa or the Proud Boys or whatever,
Just
crazy
gang.
people at riots. You might act defensively, and then you'll get charged for fighting with a police officer.
Whatever.
So I don't want to go down that route. And like Joe Rogan said, I mean, Joe Rogan outlined the exact sort of immigration policy that is more in line with what I would support. There is clearly a mandate to do something about illegal immigration and to prioritize the deportation, I say this all the time, of violent criminals, of gang-affiliated criminals, of terrorist sympathizing people, whatever. I don't think there is a mandate, and I don't want the immigration authorities to, be just hanging out in the parking lots of Home Depot or wherever else, and stopping people who just look Mexican and on suspicion. I mean, this involves now racial profiling, harassing people who are otherwise law-abiding, who are working, who have been here a long time, who are American on some level, and it just seems like, why are we doing that? I know there are now. That is my view. That is not the view of everyone in the MAGA coalition. Right. So we cannot ignore the fact that there are conservatives who want to get all of those illegal immigrants gone. Or I guess their feeling is, well, maybe we're not prioritizing those, but if you happen to apprehend one, doesn't matter if they've not committed any other crimes. This is what I voted to get rid of this person, and I don't care how nice they are, or how law-abiding they are, or how hardworking they are. They broke the laws to come into this country, and so they got to go. Right. We're not starting with them, but if we happen to apprehend someone who fits that description, well, then they're going to go.
Right. So in Rogan's case, I take him at his word that he is sincerely upset by these things that we're seeing outside Home Depots and all of that, and he doesn't believe that that is what he himself wanted. Mm-hmm. Where I have trouble with it is the surprise he is expressing that a Trump administration would do such a thing. Because Trump on the campaign trail repeatedly said he would mount the largest mass deportation program in American history. He talked about illegal migrants generally poisoning the blood of our country. He promised to take away birthright citizenship, which by its nature, obviously, affects infants and babies. So the idea that Donald Trump was going to carry out this sort of carefully calibrated immigration policy, I've no idea where Joe Rogan gets that idea from. That's not what Trump said.
Well,
and I think there's
go ahead.
I do think there's a broader issue here of people who, at least at one point, were supportive of Trump, throwing up their hands or clutching their pearls at stuff that he has plainly telegraphed that he is going to do in the case of immigration, or in relation to the broader issue about his authoritarian tendencies. Those are in plain sight. He has repeatedly talked about punishing or knocking out various pillars of dissent in this society, media, colleges, etc. And so opposition party being described as vermin, things like that. So this idea that people react to Trump by saying, oh, we never knew. Of course you knew. He said it.
Well, I think on the immigration stuff specifically, you can plausibly think that rhetoric was usually harsh rhetoric, but usually in conjunction with gang members, thugs, the people who are coming in who are causing violence and disorder, not, just workers. And Trump himself clearly has a more sympathetic view to the people who are just the workers. He's gone back and forth a couple times in ways that I find frustrating. It is Stephen Miller takes the view that they all have to go.
Right.
I genuinely don't think that is really Trump's view. And then he is someone who has a lot of different people in this coalition. Elon Musk is clearly more for at least for high-skilled immigrants. He wants more of them. But then you have Stephen Miller, and you have an actual argument going on. So I maybe on this one, I think I hear your point generally. I think maybe on immigration specifically, it is not so absurd for Joe Rogan type people to think this was really just about gang members or something.
I mean, just briefly on that, I mean, it is true that Trump often talks about violent criminals and all of that. It's also true that he casts illegal immigration generally as an invasion of our country. So I think he sees the act itself as inherently criminal and worthy of punishment. And with, you know, we could have a whole debate about whether that's right or wrong, but the fact that he believes it isn't a secret. In any event, former Columbia student Mahmoud Khalil is speaking out after he was released from ICE custody over the weekend. We'll hear what he has to say next. A legal mixed bag for the Trump administration. The Supreme Court dealing a win to the administration on Monday, allowing officials to restart the swift removal of migrants to countries other than their homelands.
The ruling from a court divided along ideological lines lifts a previous court order that required the administration officials to give detainees a chance to challenge their deportations. DHS spokesperson Tricia McLaughlin celebrated the decision on X, writing in part, "Fire up the deportation planes. DHS can now execute its lawful authority and remove illegal aliens to a country willing to accept them."
But the decision from the High Court comes after a federal judge ruled against the administration, ordering the release of former Columbia University student Mahmoud Khalil. Khalil was released over the weekend, there he is, after being jailed for more than 3 months at an ICE facility in Louisiana. He was flagged for deportation due to his involvement in last year's pro-Palestinian protests on the university's campus. Khalil returned to New York on Sunday and was defiant, speaking at a church near the Columbia campus. Take a listen.
It felt like I was literally being kidnapped. I don't remember a time where I considered giving up, because from the moment I got arrested, I knew that my case is righteous. I'm righteous. My speech should be celebrated, not punished. And this is what I will continue to do.
And that was AOC marching alongside him during his release. When Mother Jones reached out to DHS for comment on Khalil's release, the magazine said Tricia McLaughlin appeared to mix him up with Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the man mistakenly deported to El Salvador and recently returned to the U.S. Incidentally, a judge has ordered his release as well. In a follow-up statement, Mother Jones said that McLaughlin suggested Khalil use the CBP One app to self-deport.
Not sure why he would self-deport. He's a green card holder. But in any event, I'm obviously happy that Mahmoud Khalil has been released. But I don't know, you may perhaps join me in that, because it was a man who appears to have been jailed, detained for more than 3 months for his beliefs.
This one, much more so than, they're just totally different cases, but they happened at the similar times and got discussed together. Much more than Kilmar Abrego Garcia. This one seemed to be a no-brainer to me that he should not have been detained. I mean, he was not under arrest. He was just taken by the immigration authorities, despite being a green card holder. They clearly thought, I think the way the administration handled this was bad on so many levels. They clearly did not know that he had a green card rather than a student visa, which offers more protection. And then they just chalk up. I was just looking on social media about this. Sorry, I don't have my laptop, so I'm looking at the phone.
Ahead.
Right, so the Representative Wesley Hunt says, just days after a federal judge orders the release of Mahmoud Khalil, he throws an anti-Israel rally at Columbia. Khalil is not a legal citizen, yet a federal judge has granted him the position to continue spewing anti-American rhetoric. Again, it's that, so at first it's an anti-Israel rally, and then it's anti-American rhetoric. Well, is all anti-Israel rhetoric anti-American? Because Donald Trump this morning called Israel the F word because he was mad at them about what they're doing with Iran. So it's, right, do you see what I'm saying? So that's just the incoherence of this. That Mercedes Schlapp, another conservative commentator, says, if he doesn't agree with U.S. policies, he shouldn't be here. I applaud Secretary Rubio for looking at student visas to make sure they don't hate America the way that people like Khalil do. But again, I am not hearing that he hates America. I'm hearing that he disagrees with America's foreign policy in this aspect, as do tons of people all over the ideological spectrum, including on the right, including like Tucker Carlson and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Candace Owens and Steve Bannon. So I don't. So that's what's frustrating to me about this one. I just don't. Now, I have not I will admit, absorbed every single thing he's ever said about Israel, and I might find plenty of it wrong or even loathsome. I might think it's really, really awful and hateful about that country. Again, it's not our country, it's a different country. I might think that I might not want to march, next to him but I would support, like the ACLU does, for people whose views are probably more vile than his, even from my perspective, that, you shouldn't be imprisoned for that. So maybe I could question if, the politics of celebrating or appearing alongside him, but it's just the question of whether he should be allowed to be here and say what he says about American foreign policy is open and shut to me.
Right, and the idea that he is a danger to American foreign policy simply by criticizing it is, I think, an absurd notion. Right. It is worth...
That applies to Steve Bannon and Tucker Carlson. There's no way around that.
Exactly. It's people simply expressing the right to dissent. And the judge in this case, in Khalil's case, did note that the government's evidence in his mind, in the judge's mind, did not provide evidence of acts of violence or destruction of property or even incitement to violence. So, he's in the clear in that respect. I just want to pick up on a really good point you made in terms of the anti-Americanism, but also the phrasing of those demonstrations as anti-Israel. Why are they so frequently characterized as anti-Israel and sometimes anti-Semitic when in fact they can be pro-Palestinian in terms of those people's right to a peaceful life and to their homeland, or also just pro-compassion and pro-humanity and therefore opposed to people getting slaughtered by the thousand?
Yeah, and that's all fine. I will say I have been surprised by some of the characterization, for instance, of the events of October 7th as like a good thing by, for instance, National Students for Justice in Palestine celebrating that. So I have now that does not characterize all of the protests, and I think it's your right to protest, as ugly or vile as the speech may be. But let's have peace in the region. That's what we should move forward toward. That does it for us today on Rising Live. Look out for more exclusive YouTube content, coming your way later today. And be sure to like, share, and subscribe to The Hill's YouTube channel so you never miss any content for those who like to listen while on the go. We're now available anywhere you listen to podcasts, and it is just Tuesday, so we shall be back tomorrow for more news commentary. We'll see if Trump drops any more F-bombs.
You'll have your laptop back.
I'll have my laptop back, hopefully. We'll see. Bye-bye.